The political instability and economic problems that plagued Europe in the late 1920s and early 1930s weakened faith in democracy and contributed to the rise of authoritarian governments and dictatorships across Europe. As democratic governments proved unable to fix problems, people increasingly supported militaristic and nationalistic figures who promised strong leadership and immediate relief from the economic crisis created by the Great Depression. The transition to authoritarian rule was so sweeping that by the mid-1930s the only truly democratic governments left in Europe were in Scandinavia, Czechoslovakia, France, and Great Britain. The 1920s and 1930s saw the rise of new totalitarian states in Italy and Germany. Like the Soviet Union under Stalin, these totalitarian states were one-party dictatorships that attempted to regulate every aspect of the lives of their citizens. Unlike the Soviet Union, which was built on the ideology of communism, the totalitarian states of Italy and Germany were based on the ideology of fascism. The term fascism describes any centralized, authoritarian government that is not communist, but whose policies glorify the state over the individual and are destructive to basic human rights. In the 1920s and 1930s, though, fascism meant different things in different countries. All forms of fascism shared some basic features. They were rooted in extreme nationalism. Fascists glorified action, violence, discipline, and above all, blind loyalty to the state. Fascists also pursued aggressive foreign expansion. Echoing the idea of survival of the fittest, fascist leaders glorified warfare as a noble struggle for survival. Fascists were also anti-democratic. They rejected faith in reason and the concepts of equality and liberty. To them, democracy led to corruption and weakness, and put individual or class interests above national goals. Instead, fascists emphasized emotion and the supremacy of the state. Fascism appealed to people in the 1920s and 1930s for several reasons. First, it promised a strong, stable government and an end to the political feuding that had paralyzed democracy in many Western countries. Fascist leaders projected a sense of power and confidence at a time of disorder and despair. The intense nationalism of fascists also revived national pride. Fascism drew support from a broad range of people. Industrialists and large landowners applauded fascism's emphasis on order. Middle-class people, hurt by the Depression, responded to fascist promises to find quick solutions to economic problems. And people from all social classes admired fascism's emphasis on national unity. Fascists were the sworn enemies of socialists and communists. While communists worked for international change, fascists pursued national goals. Fascists supported a society with defined classes. They found allies among business leaders, wealthy landowners, and the lower middle class. Communists wanted a classless society and won support among both urban and agricultural workers. Despite such differences, the products of these two ideologies had much in common. Both drew their power by inspiring a blind devotion to the state, or a charismatic leader as the embodiment of the state. Both used terror to guard their power. Both flourished during economic hard times by promoting extreme programs of social change. In both, a party elite claimed to rule in the name of the national interest. When Italy agreed to join the Allies in World War I, France and Britain secretly promised to give Italy certain Austro-Hungarian territories. When the Allies won, Italy received some of the promised territories, but others became part of the new country of Yugoslavia. The broken promises outraged Italian nationalists. Italy also faced internal problems due to its weak economy. Inspired in part by the revolution in Russia, peasants seized land and workers went on strike or seized factories. Amid the chaos, returning veterans faced unemployment. Trade declined and taxes rose. The government, split into multiple factions that could not agree on policies and reforms, seemed powerless to end the crisis. In 1919, a veteran named Benito Mussolini organized other veterans and discontented Italians into the Fascist Party. They took the name from the Latin fasces, a bundle of sticks wrapped around an axe. In ancient Rome, the fasci symbolized unity and authority. Mussolini promised to end corruption and replace turmoil with order. He was especially skilled at exploiting the fears of the middle and upper classes of communist revolution. Mussolini also spoke of reviving Roman greatness, pledging to turn the Mediterranean into a Roman lake once again. Mussolini organized his supporters into squads known as black shirts because of their clothing. They rejected the democratic process in favor of violent action. They broke up socialist rallies, smashed left-leaning presses, and attacked peasants with communist sympathies. Fascist gangs used intimidation and terror to oust elected officials in northern Italy. Many Italians accepted these actions because they had lost faith in constitutional government. In 1922, the fascists made a bid for power. In the March on Rome, tens of thousands of fascists swarmed towards the capital. Fearing civil war, King Victor Emmanuel III asked Mussolini to form a government as prime minister. Mussolini entered the city triumphantly on October 30th, 1922. By 1925, Mussolini had assumed total power and taken the title Il Duce, or the Leader. Mussolini suppressed rival parties, muzzled the press, rigged elections, and replaced elected officials with fascist supporters. In theory, Italy remained a parliamentary monarchy. In fact, it was a dictatorship upheld by terror. Critics were thrown into prison, forced into exile, or murdered. Secret police and propaganda bolstered the regime. The fascists also took control over the economy. Although businesses continued to be privately owned, the government provided goals for production. The government also set prices and wages, and outlawed labor unions and strikes. In Mussolini's new system, the most important thing was loyalty to the state. The individual was insignificant except as a member of the state. Men, women, and children were bombarded with slogans glorifying the state and Mussolini. Believe, obey, fight became the motto of the party. Men were urged to be ruthless, selfless warriors fighting for the glory of Italy. Women were pushed out of paying jobs. Instead, Mussolini called on women to win the battle of motherhood. Shaping the young was a major fascist goal. Fascist youth groups toughened children and taught them to obey strict military discipline. Boys and girls learned about the glories of ancient Rome. At the end of World War I, frustrated German war veteran named Adolf Hitler joined the obscure German Workers' Party, one of a number of nationalist parties based in the southern German city of Munich. By the summer of 1921, he had assumed total control over the party, which he renamed the Nationalist Socialist German Workers' Party, or Nazi for short. Hitler worked to develop the party into a mass nationalistic political movement with flags, badges, uniforms, and a variety of rituals and ceremonies designed to promote loyalty and obedience. Like Mussolini and the fascists in Italy, the Nazis developed their own police force, known as the SA, the Sturmabteilung, or stormtroops, to intimidate and battle the party's enemies. Though the SA added an element of terror to the growing Nazi movement, it was Hitler's own skills as a public speaker that were largely responsible for attracting an increasing number of followers. Inspired by Mussolini's success in Italy, in November 1923, Hitler and the Nazis staged an armed uprising against the government in the city of Munich, known as the Beerhall Putsch. The attempt to seize power was quickly crushed, and a sympathetic judge sentenced Hitler to a short term in prison. During his brief stay in jail, he wrote Mein Kampf, My Struggle, an autobiographical account of his movement and its ideology. In Mein Kampf, German nationalism, anti-Semitism, and anti-communism were linked together by a Darwinian theory of struggle that stressed the right of superior nations to Lebensraum, or living space, through territorial expansion and the right of superior individuals to lead the masses. Germans were described as members of the Aryan master race of light-skinned Europeans, destined to dominate the world. According to Hitler, Jews and Slavs were inferior races that needed to be removed to make way for German civilization. Hitler also blasted the Treaty of Versailles, arguing that Germany could not rise again until the hated treaty, which he called a scrap of paper, had been destroyed. After his release from prison, Hitler reorganized the Nazi Party. It grew in size from 27,000 members in 1925 to 178,000 by the end of 1929. Many of these new members were young Germans who were fiercely committed to Hitler because he gave them the promise of a new and better life. By 1932, the Nazi Party had 800,000 members and had become the largest party in the Reichstag, the German parliament. Germany's economic difficulties during the Great Depression were a crucial factor in the Nazi rise to power. Unemployment rose dramatically, from 4.35 million in 1931 to 6 million by the winter of 1932. The terrible economic and psychological impact of the Great Depression made extremist parties like the Nazis and Communists more attractive. Increasingly, conservative elites, which included industrial leaders, landed aristocrats, the military, and bureaucrats, came to see Hitler as the man who had the support to establish a strong government that would save Germany from economic collapse and a communist takeover. Under pressure, President Paul von Hindenburg agreed to allow Hitler to become Chancellor on January 30th, 1933, and form a new coalition government. Within 2 months, Hitler had laid the foundations for the Nazis' complete takeover of Germany. The key step in Hitler's legal seizure of power came on March 23rd, when the Reichstag passed the Enabling Act in response to growing communist activity and a suspicious fire that destroyed the Reichstag building. This legislation, which empowered the government to set aside the Constitution while it issued laws that dealt with the country's problems, provided the legal basis for Hitler's subsequent acts. In effect, Hitler became a dictator appointed by the parliamentary body itself. With their new source of power, the Nazis acted quickly to consolidate their control. The civil service was purged of Jews and supporters of democratic government. Concentration camps were established for opponents of the new regime. Unions were dissolved, and all political parties except the Nazi Party were abolished. When President Hindenburg died on August 2, 1934, the office of president was abolished, and Hitler became sole ruler of Germany. Public officials and soldiers were all required to take a personal oath of loyalty to Hitler as the supreme Führer, or leader of the German people. Hitler began calling his new domain the Third Reich. Once securely in power, Hitler pursued the creation of an Aryan racial state that would dominate Europe and the world. Mass demonstrations and spectacles were employed to unify the German nation and mobilize it as an instrument for Hitler's policies. Hitler and the Nazis were especially skilled at using new technology and mass media to flood the German people with propaganda and promote loyalty to Hitler. Radio and film were important tools for shaping public views, and the Nazi state controlled both within Germany. One of the most famous Nazi propaganda films was Triumph of the Will, created by famous female director Leni Riefenstahl. Much of the dramatic footage came from mass rallies held by the Nazis in the city of Nuremberg. Like other Nazi films, it glorified Hitler as the leader of the German people. The Nazis used public works projects and military production to boost employment and end the Depression. Unemployment, which had stood at 6 million in 1932, dropped to 2.6 million in 1934 and less than 500,000 in 1937. Other institutions, including the Catholic and Protestant churches, primary and secondary schools, and universities, were also brought under the control of the state. Nazi professional organizations and leagues were formed for civil servants, teachers, women, farmers, doctors, and lawyers. Youth organizations, such as the Hitler Youth, were created to indoctrinate the young in Nazi ideology and promote loyalty and obedience to Hitler and the state. For its enemies, the Nazi totalitarian state had its instruments of terror and repression. Especially important was the SS, or Schutzstaffel. Originally created as Hitler's personal bodyguard, the SS, under the direction of Heinrich Himmler, came to control all of the regular and secret police forces. Himmler and the SS functioned on the basis of two principles: ideological purity and terror. The SS would eventually play a major role in the execution squads and death camps for the extermination of the Jews. Enemies of the state were rooted out by the Gestapo, a secret police force that worked in close conjunction with the SS. Anyone who questioned the Nazi regime and its policies could be imprisoned or executed without due process of law by the Gestapo. The Nazi Party reflected the strong anti-Semitic beliefs of Adolf Hitler, who saw Jews as anti-nationalist and part of the conspiracy that had led to Germany's defeat in World War I. Once in power, the regime quickly moved against the Jews. In September 1935, the Nazis announced new racial laws at the annual party rally in Nuremberg. These Nuremberg laws excluded German Jews from German citizenship and forbade marriages and extramarital relations between Jews and German citizens. A more violent phase of anti-Semitism was initiated on November 9th through 10th, 1938, in the infamous Kristallnacht, or Night of Shattered Glass. The assassination of a German diplomat in Paris became the excuse for a Nazi-led destructive rampage against the Jews, in which synagogues were burned, Jewish businesses were destroyed, and at least 100 Jews were killed. Moreover, thousands of Jews were rounded up and sent to concentration camps. Jews were barred from all public buildings and prohibited from owning, managing, or working in any retail store. Finally, under the direction of the SS, Jews were encouraged to emigrate from Germany.